Godwyn the Golden, scion of the Golden Bough, victim of the Black Knives plot. A demigod rendered a soulless and misshapen husk that would paradoxically take on a new life as the Prince of Death. But what you don't know is that Godwyn's curse is far worse than meets the eye. I welcome you, Tarnished, to join me, Zaif the Scholar, as I show you all the creepy details surrounding Godwyn's corruption, including several findings I haven't seen mentioned anywhere else. So, let's talk about it. But before we get into all the details, I'd like to shout out this video's sponsor, Awesome Hank. So guys, the realities of life mean that I have to get a lot of gaming done on the go. And whether I'm taking a trip back to Lordran to catch up with Solaire, or saving Termina from an impending lunar disaster for the 1000th time, there's nothing worse than taking out my console and realizing my screen is covered in distracting fingerprints. And that's where Awesome Hank comes in. They make these stylish but functional handkerchiefs that feature a lens-grade microfiber backing that will help you keep your devices smudge-free and ready to play. They actually sent over a few handkerchiefs for me to check out, and I'm honestly blown away at the quality. Check out this vibrant Dark Souls-inspired bonfire design. Not only is it beautifully printed, but it features a durable 3-ply construction that's handmade right here in the USA. Not quite your style? Well, Awesome Hank has you covered by offering a wide variety of designs. So if you're looking for a stylish way to keep your devices clean and support an awesome small company making cool stuff in the process, I highly recommend you give Awesome Hank a look. You can find a link to Awesome Hank's online store below and use code ZAIF at checkout to get 10% off site-wide with any purchase of $10 or more. Thanks for your attention, and thanks again to Awesome Hank for sponsoring this video. So guys, I have a bit of a confession to make. I'm kind of obsessed with Godwyn. There's something about his design that just gets to me. It's simultaneously absolutely grotesque, and yet has such a strange air of tragedy and of course mystery about it. The golden child of Marika and Godfrey, transfigured into this twisted form. Every element of Godwyn's design evokes questions, like why does he have a fishtail? Why are his arms contorted in this position? Is his face meant to be viewed this way or this way? And at what point did he become such an absolute unit? I mean, just look at the size of him compared to my Tarnished here. But what I want to focus on today actually isn't Godwyn's body at all, but rather the horrifying corrupting effect his corpse is wreaking on its surroundings. Godwyn's body is of course found in the Deeproot depths beneath Leyndell. And as the name of this area suggests, we can indeed find the massive pillar-like roots of the Erdtree permeating the landscape here. Gigantic scale aside, the roots all look like normal parts of a tree, and are covered in this innocuous bark texture. All except for the roots that Godwyn's body is braced against, or what seems to be referred to in-game as Godwyn's throne. These roots have been absolutely rotted to their core. Now, some of this corruption is of course apparent to normal players just walking around in this area. But for some reason, FromSoft really went all out here with disturbing details that not only will most players never see, but that are actually pretty much impossible to see without mods. And even then, you have to be a weirdo like me who comes here to hang out in my free time to even notice them. So, let me give you a little tour of Godwyn's throne. First of all, one thing that's very difficult to see without freecam mods is that the roots Godwyn is attached to have not only blackened, but are covered in what looks like red patches of blood. This is particularly apparent when viewing the main root pillar behind Godwyn, which is covered in huge globs of the stuff and looks disturbingly sticky. And FromSoft didn't just sprinkle a few blood spatters here or there where the player could see them and call it a day. All of the roots behind Godwyn from top to bottom are coated in this black and bloody texture, despite it being barely even visible from the standard player POV. Whether this is actual blood or perhaps some sort of corrupted sap, I'm not sure. But I think we can agree that either way, it's pretty metal. Next, let's talk about the primary forms of growth we find emanating from Godwyn, which I think are a bit more diverse than people might first realize. First, we have these tentacle-like growths that are lined with fin-like appendages similar to those found on Godwyn's own deformed arms, as well as on the arms of basilisks, creatures that share many other intriguing parallels with Godwyn. We can find tons of these tentacles emanating out from the roots surrounding Godwyn's body, but what I didn't notice until recently is just how massive some of these tentacles really are. In fact, some of them are a similar girth to the arms on Godwyn's corpse itself, and even have what appear to be elbow-like joints. You can really appreciate how girthy they are once my tarnished is placed nearby. Pretty creepy. Another kind of distinct growth present here is what I'll refer to as Deathblight spires, since visually these are pretty much identical to the ones that appear when a player character gets death-blighted. These two can be found among the corrupted roots comprising Godwyn's throne. But unlike the tentacles we looked at earlier, which seem to resemble normal roots that were deformed and grow in a plant-like manner to cover their surroundings, these Deathblight spires appear to shoot out from within the floor and the corrupted roots, much like they're bursting out from within Godwyn's own body. Similar to the tentacles, though, is that these two are highly variable in size, with some of the out-of-reach spires being absolutely massive and easily dwarfing our player character. As many people have observed, although at first glance these Deathblight spires appear to be covered in thorns, these growths are actually flywings. But what I haven't seen anyone else point out is that the spires themselves appear to be made up of countless maggot-like growths that have congealed together. This is especially apparent when observing the large-sized spires, particularly towards their base, where we can see what look like individual maggot larvae spread apart. Now, maggots and flies are of course both common symbols of death and decay, but the design and visual execution here illustrates a level of attention to detail that we've come to really appreciate from Miyazaki and his team, and it's pretty cool to see it up close. And speaking of seeing, let's talk about my favorite and most disturbing sign of Godwyn's corruption: the appearance of Godwyn's eyes. If you've spent any time looking around this area, you may have already found these 3 giant eyes among the bloodied roots towards the left side of Godwyn's corpse. But I'm willing to bet that I found some more eyes that you probably weren't aware of. At least, I haven't seen them mentioned elsewhere. And I think that's because even with FreeCam mods enabled, this area is so shrouded in darkness that it's almost impossible to see them without a torch and/or some editing in post. So let's go have a look, shall we? So starting from the bottom of the roots and working our way up, there's one eye on this branch located above the main 3 I mentioned earlier, and we can also find one more tucked away behind it off to the left side. Heading back towards the center and towards the right side of Godwyn, we can see a cluster of 5 more giant eyes among the tentacles and blight spires. Moving vertically up the trunk, we can find a cluster of 7 more. And finally, way up here above all the rest, is this one lone eye overlooking the area. And I have to say, it's quite difficult to convey in my footage just how high up many of these eyes are, but I'll try to include some angles where my tarnished is using some items near the eyes while my camera is at ground level. He pretty much looks like a speck at this distance, and it kinda makes me wonder why they went out of their way to position the eyeballs this high up. From a thematic standpoint, the appearance of numerous eyes is of course something FromSoft has played with quite a bit throughout their catalog. But I think Godwyn's eyes have to be my favorite in terms of scale and execution. And I'm honestly a little perplexed as to why FromSoft didn't make these at least a bit more visible, as they clearly put a lot of work into it, and seeing the roots riddled with colossal eyeballs is pretty horrifying.
Aha! Welcome to our dream. We will be granted eyes. Grant us eyes. Grant us eyes. Plant eyes on our brains to cleanse our beastly idiocy.
I can only guess that maybe they didn't want to detract from Godwyn's corpse itself as a focal point of this area. But in any case, the fact that they took the time to make the roots look this cursed and visually interesting definitely deserves some recognition. Godwyn's corruption reaches towering heights far greater than most are ever likely to see or notice. With his throne of bloodied roots and eyeballs out of the way, I'd also like to talk a bit about the area surrounding Godwyn, specifically the connection between purple hues and death. So to start, let's notice that the area around Godwyn's corpse is flooded with this purple miasmic fluid, and we can actually see human remains sitting in these shallow pools. Does this remind you of anything? Ponds of purple liquid pooling into an area of stagnance and putrefaction. This seems both visually and thematically to parallel the depths of the fissure, where we find the abandoned Trina and her putrescent knight. And that's of course not the only connection between purple and death we see in Elden Ring, since the eyes of the Gloam-eyed queen are believed by most to be a shade of purple, and the putrescent knight is actually labeled the Gloam-eyed knight in the game files. Now, don't get me wrong, I'm not saying there's any direct connection here between Godwyn, Trina, and the Gloam-eyed queen, but the visual and thematic parallels are pretty neat to notice. So just to recap, we can see 4 clear and recurrent visual motifs when talking about the spread of Godwyn's corruption. Maggot and fly-themed deathblight spires, blackened and bloody tree roots, finned tentacle-like growths, and the appearance of numerous eyes. The latter 2 of these motifs are incorporated into the death root that we discover is spreading throughout the lands between following Godwyn's assassination. Both eyes and finned tentacles are clearly visible in their design, and serve as a way of signposting Godwyn's ability to spread like a cancer throughout the lands. This can also be said about the deathblight crabs who bear Godwyn's visage on their backs, in the form of pustules and patches of blonde hair. But I'd like to take the time here to again try to clear up a common misconception I keep seeing repeated in the comments of my videos. Despite many people claiming that Stormveil Castle is also covered in deathroot and signs of Godwyn's corruption, the thorns we see at Stormveil are visually distinct. We don't see the finned tentacle-like growths, nor do we see the fly-winged deathblight spires. Now, without question, we do see thorns growing all over Stormveil Castle, but the thorns that we see have a lot more visually in common with the ones covering the corpses in the mountaintops of the giants than they do with Godwyn's corrupted growths. Not only is there no deathroot as it appears in the Deeproot depths, but there is also no sign of the deathroot that we see in the base game catacombs and places like Summonwater Village. And it's pretty intriguing that despite Stormveil's basement and 2 of the DLC catacombs being home to 3 giant visages of Godwyn, other signs of his corruption are nowhere to be found in those areas. We see no finned tentacles, no deathblight spires, no stagnant purple waters, and no blackened bloody roots. In fact, the roots that we do see in the DLC catacombs near Godwyn's cadaver surrogates look quite sterile and untouched compared to the mess we see near Godwyn's actual body. And this leads to my continued belief that the misshapen corpse under Stormveil and the DLC cadaver surrogates didn't simply grow out from the ground, but were instead the result of intervention from other concerned parties. But that's a whole nother can of worms, and you can check out my other videos on Godwyn if you're curious about my theories on that. In any case, I hope you enjoyed this deep dive on the heights of Godwyn's corruption, as it seemed like a pretty apt topic for spooky season, and I hopefully brought some new observations to the table. But what do you guys think? I'm looking forward to hearing your interpretations and thoughts in the comments. If you like this video, don't forget to like and subscribe and hit the bell so you don't miss the next one. It really helps out my channel a lot, and I genuinely appreciate it. And hey, I'd also appreciate it if you considered supporting my channel by becoming a patron, a YouTube member, or buying me a coffee. Thanks a ton for watching, and I'll see you in the next one.